planet has given a sort of instinct for what is good based on just like the people who lived like back before, like back when we were like tribes and whatnot, like only the people who were good lived because they helped each other out, and maybe like goodness is almost an instinct.
All right.
You know what I'm saying?
And I would say you're partly right. I get very frustrated with my Christian friends who say, oh, you're struggling with depression? Just pray. Just pray. Yeah, baloney. Part of depression basis is there's a mind prior to the human mind that creates human beings with value, which means if I denigrate you, I am attacking the intrinsic innate value that God gave you when he made you. Mm-hmm. And that is wrong.
Right.
Right?
So but I don't know. I'm not religious myself, but for me it's just like I'm a good person because like I think people just have value as people. Like not that it's like given to them divinely, but just like they're here, we're all in the same boat. It's just like
all right. And I like you. Why? Because you're honest enough to be in touch with the real you. Not always. I think you're like me, and at times we part company with a real us, and we do some pretty crazy, stupid things. And we regret it later, and we experience guilt. But you know very well that you know what goodness is. And that is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that some type of God, not Jesus, Jesus is not part of the discussion right now. This is atheism and theism. But because you know that goodness is real, that is one of the clearest pieces of evidence that some type of God exists. Why? This inanimate matter has no ability to understand goodness versus evil. It takes a mind, doesn't it, to understand good and evil. Well, if there is no eternal mind, in other words, if there is no mind prior to the human mind, then it's obviously you and me who create good versus evil. But you see, that means that I'm not right and you're not wrong. You're not wrong, I'm not right. It's all relative, which means when I look into the face of a Nazi, I can't say gassing Jews is absolutely wrong. All I can say is from my cultural perspective, from my individualistic perspective, gassing Jews is wrong. But I understand you come from a different culture. You've got your own definition. It's all relative. And you see, I don't think you'll live your life that way. Because I think you have such a clear understanding of goodness that if someone hurts you, or if someone hurts someone you really love, you're going to look at them and say, you should not have done that.
Yeah, and I think that because, my definition of goodness is subject to change, like you're right, but it's more just like a daily battle to like try and do the right thing. And I think everybody does it. Like no one wants to be a bad person, and like, but I think I'm trying to understand. I think like what you're saying is that like conscience, like guilt comes from a higher power, and it's not just like something that could like be evolved per se.
Okay, so good. You're almost there, I would say. Conscience and guilt informs me what? It informs me that there is an objective value of goodness. Your experience of love, and I bet you've experienced it in some way, I don't know which way, but your experience of love should tell you this thing is real. It's not physical. I can't take an x-ray of this person's heart and locate love. I can't get a blood test from them and locate love. But it's very, very real. It's so real that I'm going to stand out here and say, I want to live a good life. Those values, the only way they can be real is if there is some mind prior to the human mind who creates and defines those values and gives you a conscience, as you pointed out, and with your conscience, you can understand what is good and what is evil. Does that make any sense?
Right, but also like, I mean, you can kind of measure it like you can measure like dopamine levels and stuff, and so maybe like you could argue that love or like goodness is like a societal construct, and like we feel good based on what other people do because of like our body producing dopamine and whatnot.
Yes.
And so we feel like obligated maybe like through society to produce the same result in other people, and maybe like on one hand like God put that into everyone, but maybe like you could argue on the other hand like society, like through the thousands of years that humans have been on this planet, has given a sort of instinct for what is good based on just like the people who lived like back back when we were like tribes and whatnot, like only the people who were good lived because they helped each other out, and maybe like goodness is almost an instinct.
All right.
You know what I'm saying?
And I would say you're partly right. I get very frustrated with my Christian friends who say, oh, you're struggling with depression? Just pray. Just pray. Yeah, baloney. Part of depression involves chemicals, and that is why a psychiatrist and medicine are important. But I also get very frustrated with my atheist psychiatrist friends who say it's all chemical. No, it's not all chemical. That's why therapy is good at times, to deal with the emotional scars that you've experienced. But I'm standing here saying, guess what? There's also the spiritual. There's the physical, there's the emotional, but there's also the spiritual. And the reason that you should believe in God is because you know that goodness is a non-physical value. You know that love is a non-physical value. In other words, you know that atheism does not tell the whole story. It's not an accurate picture of reality, because you experience goodness and you experience love. And that should tell you there's a lot more to reality than matter and energy and chemicals.
The Gospels are generally accepted to not have actually been written by Matthew, John, and Peter.
Really?
It was other people.
What's the evidence that that's true?
Because they were written after those people would have died.
One manuscript find, the John Rylands fragment
there are manuscripts
in the John Rylands Museum in Manchester, England, smashes the whole school of thought you just put forth here. You're wrong, sir. The evidence is the Gospels were written in the 1st century. So come on, give me some better reasons.
1st century, but like...
Yeah, 1st century.
But the earliest was 30 years after Jesus died.
Yeah?
It's generally accepted to not have been written by...
No, it is not generally accepted.
I think it was, wasn't it?
False.
Which
Why?
one was it, Matthew?
Because the early church fathers talk about Matthew writing Matthew, Mark writing Mark, Luke writing Luke, and John writing John. Papias, Polycarp, Irenaeus talk about these guys writing these books. Now, sir, in the late 40s, you've got Paul writing Galatians. In the early 50s, you've got Paul writing 1 Corinthians. And Jesus is talked about by Paul as an historical person who lived an amazing life, died on a cross, rose from the dead. You've got many eyewitnesses alive still who can say, no, you're wrong, Paul.
But here's the thing, there are other contemporaneous documents that were written around the same time, written about Jesus' life, that were not eventually incorporated into the Bible.
Give me one example.
The Gospel of Judas.
Yeah, when was that written?
That was written, I believe, around the time of the Gospel of Matthew.
No, it was not. It was written in the 2nd century. Those are Gnostic Gospels. And all you got to do is read the Gospel of Judas. Who's the hero of the Gospel of Judas?
Judas.
Exactly. Why would Judas be a hero in a gospel?
Because the Gospel of Judas says that Jesus asked Judas to betray him so he could die on the cross and be resurrected.
The Gospel of Judas is making Judas Iscariot the hero because it's based on a Gnostic philosophy that the physical is evil and the spiritual is good. And Judas Iscariot was a great guy because he helped Jesus lose his body. That's why Judas Iscariot is the hero in the Gospel of Judas. And that obviously contradicts Orthodox Christianity, which teaches the physical is good and the spiritual is good because God created both.
I mean, I'm pointing out that there are a lot of Gospels that have major contradictions in terms of the story.
Good, give me one.
I mean, Judas Iscariot being asked to betray Jesus by Jesus for one was the one I was going for with mentioning.
No, but that's a Gnostic gospel. That's not an historically accurate gospel. It's based on Gnostic philosophy.
There's also the Gospel of Peter, which I believe is actually the oldest one.
It's not the oldest one. Once again, 2nd century.
That one was 2nd century, okay.
Yeah. Those Gnostic Gospels are 2nd century Gospels, which means they're obviously not written by eyewitnesses. They're not written by those who knew the eyewitnesses. But the name of Judas and the name of Peter is attached to the document to give it significance, to up its credibility rating. Peter didn't write the Gospel of Peter. Judas obviously didn't write the Gospel of Judas.
None of them did write the Gospels written after them.
Yeah, Matthew wrote Matthew, John wrote John, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke. And they wrote him in the first century, which means they're eyewitnesses still living who can say, I'm sorry, Jesus did not rise from the dead. Just check out Mark chapter 15, verse 21, where Mark writes about Simon of Cyrene helped Christ drag the cross up the hill where he was nailed. And guess what? Simon of Cyrene had two sons, Alexander and Rufus. Well, what on earth is Mark doing talking about Alexander and Rufus, the sons of Simon of Cyrene? Because Alexander and Rufus were probably alive at the time, so you can go and talk to Alexander and Rufus if you want to find out the details of the crucifixion of Christ. What do you have your faith in, sir?
I've considered converting to Buddhism. By the way, the Buddha's life is better historically attested than Jesus's.
Really?
Yes.
And where do you read that? Where do you read about Buddha's life being so historically verified?
What is the name of the text? I forget it because the name is in Pali, but it was written by someone who is historically attested. To not only be the actual author, but have been someone who actually met the actual Siddhartha Gautama. That chronicled the Buddha's life.
Sir, the historical evidence is that Siddhartha Gautama Buddha did live, no question about it. But the overwhelming historical evidence is also that Jesus of Nazareth lived,
yes,
died, and rose again.
Not that he rose again.
Why not? Because you have a philosophical presupposition, and your philosophical presupposition says miracles don't happen. Therefore, if the Gospels record a miracle, they're obviously false. Sir, that is so prejudiced, it's incredible. Stop being so prejudiced. Open your mind and allow for the possibility of the supernatural. And if you allow for the possibility of a supernatural God, then it's obvious that this supernatural God can perform a miracle. But if you limit reality to simply matter and energy, that's sad. You can't live that way.
I mean, I don't. What I'm trying to do is challenge the primacy of Christianity as a belief system, specifically in this context.
Well, I'm not out here to communicate the primacy of Christianity. I'm out here. I abhor much of Christian history: the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the enslavement of African Americans by white Christians. It stinks. It's gross. It's horrible. But Jesus Christ is radically different, and that is why the majority of Africans have put their faith in Christ, not because of white colonialists, but because the evidence is Jesus Christ was totally sane, totally compassionate, held tightly to the truth, died on a cross, and 3 days later rose from the dead.
I mean, I believe all this stuff except rose from the dead.
Well, why? Why can't you believe he rose from the dead?
Beyond me.
Because, again, okay, I don't remember exactly why, but the consensus among historians is that the Gospels were not written by the people they are attributed to.
Who are they written by then? From your study, because you've studied the issue so carefully, and you can't accept the Gospels being written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Who were they written by, and what's your evidence to support that?
We don't know.
That's
I'm looking it up.
We do know.
It's just
I told you, I gave you the sources. Papias, Polycarp, Irenaeus. The early church fathers write about Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke, John wrote John. And even if they didn't, so what? They were written in the first century. Those who had seen Christ validated them and said these Gospels are reliable. I am aware of the fact that in the original autographs, we don't have the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke and John. We don't have that, right? But from the writings of the early church fathers, we understand the eyewitness community produced the Gospels. So what if Matthew didn't write Matthew? So what if Mark didn't write Mark? The eyewitness community testified these guys are historically accurate. This is what Jesus said. This is how he lived. This is how he died, and this is how he rose from the dead.
But what if I don't believe that the concept of individuals is meaningful?
If you say that to me, I would accuse you of being an intellectual hypocrite. Why? Because I bet you do value your relationships with friends. I bet you make a distinction between enemy and friend. Person who you really don't care to get to know versus person you do get to know. So don't stand out here and tell me that you don't value certain people.
What part of a phone makes it a phone?
I don't know. I didn't make the phone.
If you take apart a phone, and take all of its parts and use them in other electronics, are they still a phone?
No. It's got to be together in order for it to be a phone.
So what you're saying is a phone is just a label for a collection of parts that perform a specific purpose.
Yeah, but it's a very accurate label.
Isn't that the same with people?
You're a human being created in the image of God. Can you have a lobotomy that changes you radically? Yeah, but guess what? Please don't get a lobotomy. Please stay yourself. But yes, if you have a lobotomy, if you have a horrible car accident, your brain is really messed up, yeah, you'll be different. Yes, but you're still a valuable human being created in the image of God.
So how many parts do you have to take away to stop it?
I do not know. I don't know.
So which part of the brain is it that makes you a person?
The whole thing. So don't get rid of any of your brain. You're going to lose enough brain cells as it is. Don't get rid of any of your brain. It's a beautiful gift from God.
I think that's an inappropriately literal interpretation of what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that there isn't a fundamental kernel of you-ness. Your brain is a bunch of parts. Your brain and those parts are a bunch of cells. Well, so they're acting together and they perform a purpose together, and that purpose is what we call you, but there is no fundamental existence that is you.
There is no me that you can x-ray. You're right. There's no me that comes out in a blood test. You are correct. But I would argue that science, although it's a wonderful branch of knowledge, is not all of knowledge. There's such a thing as relationship, loving a person, trusting a person.
I said I was a Buddhist. I'm not saying science is everything.
But when you start talking about the brain and how much of your brain do you have to lose, you're back into your materialism. You're an interesting combination of a materialist and someone who's flirting with Buddhism.
Buddhism is a fairly materialist religion.
All right, good. So you are a materialist who's flirting with Buddhism. At least that's what you said. You're considering Buddhism.
I am considering it, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm sitting here saying, please consider Jesus Christ. Read the Gospels. Ask yourself, does the evidence of the way Jesus lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead point to him being reliable or not?
But you say that materialism is a contradiction, but like the argument I'm giving about how a human is just a collection of parts is an argument literally given in the Questions of King Melinda, one of the most important texts in Buddhism.
Yeah. And I'm saying don't become a Buddhist for many different reasons. Here's the first reason. For you to believe that suffering is an illusion would be very sad. Suffering is not an illusion, sir. Suffering is very real. And you want to know why I'm not a Buddhist and instead I'm a follower of Christ? Because when I stand in front of a statue of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, sitting cross-legged with a little smile on his face, telling me that suffering is an illusion, for me to accept that would be to part company with reality. Because I sit beside the bed of dying people who are dying in pain of terminal cancer and other weird diseases. Instead, when I stand before the cross of Jesus Christ, and he's in agony there, but he's offering forgiveness and eternal life, that is reality, sir. That is a God who I can connect with, because guess what? I suffer, and we all suffer. And a God who wants to meet us in our suffering, that's called reality, as opposed to suffering's an illusion. No, it's not an illusion. It's very real. And that's why I respect Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, but I can't be a Buddhist. Because suffering's real.
Except the Mahayana and Vajrayana interpretations of Buddhism,
Yeah.
the two most predominant sects, hold that helping other people is noble because when people are safe and healthy and provided for, they are in the best conditions to reach enlightenment.
Good. And so there's a lot to commend in Buddhism.
That isn't an exhortation to ignore suffering.
But correct. And that's a part of Buddhism that I celebrate. But then if you study Buddhism further, you begin to realize that what Siddhartha Gautama Buddha was saying was, cut off your desires. What? Yeah, cut off your desires. Wait a second. I desire to help you if you're hurting. I can't cut off all my desires. Instead, I need to learn as a thinking human being to discern the difference between good desires and bad desires.
But but the teachings of Buddhism suggest that you should help someone not because you desire to, but because it's good.
Okay, fine. I desire to do good, all right? And guess what? I think you desire to do good at times also. I think we're very similar.
I would agree.
Okay? So, get in touch with your desire to do good and ask yourself, where does that desire come from? Is it objective? Is it real? Or is it just a blind prejudice?
I need to get the thought.
You bet. Good to talk. Yes, sir.
I was raised, Jewish, and my question is, if someone, follows all the mitzvot, every one of the Torah, as good as they can, but they don't accept Jesus,
right?
What happens to them in the afterlife?
You bet. Abraham, that fine Jewish patriarch, is going to be in heaven. Why? Because he put his faith in God, not because he lived a great life. He did some pretty horrible things to his wife Sarah. But Abraham was a man of faith. He trusted in God, saying, God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'm trusting you for eternity. Now, Jesus Christ communicated that he is that sacrificial lamb that the Old Testament talks about. Jesus Christ says, I'm the one who laid down my life for you to forgive you and to give you eternal life. Why not put your faith in Jesus as that one who Abraham ultimately believed in?
So I want to ask you about the afterlife, but I think it's first important to understand kind of your belief system a little bit better. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So you mentioned to another person here a few minutes ago, you believe that he and his grandmother were created either directly or indirectly by the Omnipotent. Is that fair?
Right.
Do you believe that all of us were created by the Omnipotent? Okay. Do you believe that the story of Adam and Eve and in the Garden of Eden, do you believe that is to be taken literally? So in other words, do you believe that Adam and Eve, if we had that they were historical people, that the Garden of Eden was a historical place? Do you believe those things? Or do you think that maybe those are metaphorical?
Right. I personally believe that Adam and Eve were real historical people.
Okay.
But if I get to heaven and find out that that was an allegory, I'm not going to be blown out of the water.
Okay, that's good. So let's assume it's an allegory.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that the suffering and things that you've described, that we experience in this life, not the afterlife, do you believe that those things are the cause, direct or indirect, of the fallibility of man's sin? Our suffering, in other words, our capacity to suffer, and the suffering that we experience, either as a result of let's say natural forces like bad weather could be one, but also someone beating us malevolently and maliciously, that could be another. So one is something sort of out of control of man, but another is within the control of man. Does it make sense, those two scenarios?
Yes.
Do you believe that all of these things, the suffering that we experience as human beings on this earth, is due to man's fallibility, our capacity for sin, and our separation from God?
Partially.
Okay.
I think Eugene O'Neill put it very well when he wrote, we're all born broken.
Okay.
Life is about healing. The grace of God is the glue.
So would it be fair to say then that at least some of our suffering
Yes.
is due to man's free will?
Yes.
Do you think it's good that God has granted us free will in this life?
Because the only way you and I can love is by exercising our free will, yes, I'm very grateful that God created us with a free will.
I'm not sure it's necessarily fair.
Okay?
I mean, the description, the interpretation of the Christian afterlife, which I think a lot of us have, is one in which we live in eternal praise of the omnipotence of God. Is that really free will? And doesn't that sort of have a contradiction to the idea of what's good about God letting us suffer in the way we have in this life? I mean, Christopher Hitchens called the notion of the Christian notion of the afterlife a celestial North Korea, in which we all live in eternal praise. Everything is to the state and is in praise of the state in North Korea. If you want to see the opera, it's all in praise of Kim Il-sung and the dictatorship there. Yeah. All the art, all the music, everything is in all the media that you could consume over the radio and right. So on and so forth. It's all in praise of the dictatorship. I think the idea that we have of heaven is very similar. That to me doesn't sound like a very pleasant place. I mean, I very much like the idea of having free will, of being able to choose who I like, who I don't like.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't sound like being forced to do that and being in almost like a slave labor, even if it's one that doesn't involve a lot of whips. Right. It doesn't seem like a very pleasant idea to me at all.
All right. Well, the answer to that I think is real simple. If you, sir, think that I obey Jesus today because he's whipping me, you're wrong. If you think that I obey Jesus today because I don't want to go to hell, you're wrong. If you think I obey Jesus today because he's got a carrot out in front of my nose saying, hey, buddy, if you behave well, you'll go to heaven, and if you don't behave well, you don't get the carrot, you're wrong. I obey Jesus because I am convinced he's wiser than I am. He's the eternal God who created the universe. It would be stupid for me and unwise of me not to obey him because he understands better than I do what is good, what is evil, what is the purpose of a human life. Secondly, I obey Jesus because I am convinced he loves me more than my own wife, who loves me incredibly. And so therefore, I obey Jesus because he loves me, not because he's playing a carrot game with me. Hey, come on, buddy. Live this way, and you get the carrot. He's not doing that. He really loves me for who I am, in spite of my flipping him off.
Right, but I think you're a couple of things. I don't believe I implied anyway, that the reasons why you love God, that you love Jesus Christ, are because there's sort of some sort of impetus that's less than positive. I don't think I implied that. I believe that you see a goodness in the idea of Jesus that's very real.
You brought North Korea into the equation. I didn't bring it in.
No, but I mean...
If you expect me to listen to your analogy with North Korea and basically having to pay obedience...
We're talking about your belief system, though.
Yeah, my belief system is God is good. And because God is good, it's very wise for me to live life his way. And God is love. And because God is love, it is very smart of me to live life his way.
No, I never said that you were forced in this life to love God. I never said there was sort of that God would punish you in this life if you didn't love him.
Then what did you say?
I said that you have the free will in this life, but that's taken away from you in the afterlife.
No! I'm going to have free will in the afterlife.
That doesn't really strike me as the common conception of the Christian afterlife, in which you live in eternal praise of God. You don't seem to have a choice, and so then would you? I guess to phrase it another way, if you were to say in heaven, I no longer believe in God, would you then go to hell? Would you be excommunicated from heaven?
No. If you're in heaven, if you're living in the presence of God, and you have been saved, meaning by that you have realized the horrors of rebellion against God, you've put your faith in Christ, you're beginning to grapple with the depth of his love for you, you're not going to want to sin. Right now, I dabble with the irrational. Did God create me to be fascinated by the irrational? No. He created me to celebrate the rational. Part of sin is I dabble with the irrational. And that's sad.
So we are created irrational then.
We're created irrational.
We will be perfected in heaven.
But part of our rebellion against God is to learn to celebrate the irrational.
So we will be perfected in heaven then, is what you're saying.
Well, here, it's real simple. I want to be like Jesus, and I'm not. But in heaven, God's going to give me the strength to really be like Jesus. And I can hardly wait. Because at times I'm mean, At times I lose my temper with snotty-nosed university students. Not you, but others. So I am not a perfect moral specimen, okay? And I hate it. When I was speaking at Brown University, this Ivy League student comes walking down the path saying, oh, here's another one of them narrow-minded, bigoted Christians telling us we all need to believe in Jesus. Well, I just ripped into the guy. I said, you know something, talk about narrow-minded. You haven't listened to a word I've said. You've stereotyped me. You are a bigot. And it got worse from there. Remarkably, the guy sat right down in the crowd. And about 5 minutes later, I had to look him in the face and say, my man, I'm really sorry. I denigrated you. I was mean. Would you please forgive me? So that's me. I'm this weird mixture of good and evil. At times I do good, at other times I do evil. But in heaven, Christ is going to give me the power not to do the evil that I hate. But I still do it at times. So I'm one weird dude. You are talking to a weird dude. We're all born broken. Life is about healing. The grace of God is the glue that brings the healing about. But we are born broken. And if you don't think you're born broken, all right, I am born broken. And guess what? All of my children were born broken, and all of my friends are born broken. But if you're not born broken, you're really a privileged person.
Even though I'm a Christian right now, sometimes there are some inconsistencies I can't get over with. I believe that God is all-powerful. I do believe that God is all good. However, as you said before, we're all born broken. If God is all good but also all-powerful, why would he make us born broken?
Okay, good. Very hard question. I can't give you a watertight answer. Here's how I personally think through that difficult issue. God is all-powerful. The all-powerful God chose to partially limit his power by giving you and me free will, which means I can haul back, slap you in the face. If I say to him, God made me do that, I'm lying to him. God gave me a hand and a will. Now, God gave me this hand for a purpose, to respect you and to love you. But because I have a free will, I can violate the purpose for which God gave me this hand, haul back and slap you. But if I have the audacity to blame God, I'm a con artist. I'm a liar. Because God is not going to put plexiglass suddenly between my hand and your handsome face so that it bounces off. No, because he's created me with a free will, I can do things, but I'm responsible. And that's why there's going to be a day of judgment, when God holds me responsible for denigrating you by taking a gift he gave me, a hand, and abusing you with it. That's sin. Taking a good gift, a hand, violating the purpose for which God gave me this good gift, and smacking you. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, how have I not answered your question? Keep going.
The issue
it's a profound issue you're raising, obviously.
Because that goes into the question why God created humans in the first place.
Yes.
So how would you answer that?
I do not know.
Okay. That's a fair question.
I don't know what motivated God to create.
Okay.
But what I do know is God created you and me for a purpose. And that purpose is to love God and to love each other. You know, Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? And he says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So I do know that God created you and me for the purpose of loving him and loving each other.